But thanks everyone for joining. Thanks to the panelists, for being here and sharing your time with us today. Really excited for this month's Matt's Chats. We are talking about tariffs and duty drawbacks and really the new global supply chain. So topics that obviously we're all thinking about, we're all bracing for topics that seem to be changing by the day these days, particularly right now, as things are happening overseas. But really excited to bring different perspectives to the table. Gene from MasonHub, who runs a 3PL, Thomas from Passport, a cross-border global trade company, and Ryan, the previous COO and CFO at tomboyx, and a really great operator. So we're going to have some really great perspectives to talk about how, tariffs are really impacting, brands 3PLs and clients 3PLs. And, we all know that these policies have been incredibly volatile over the last, 18 months, at least a year now. And it doesn't seem like things have subsided. They're only kind of continuing to get more and more, volatile. So excited for this group. So without further ado, I do want to introduce our three speakers and allow them to share a little bit about themselves. Maybe we'll start with Gene and then go with Thomas and then Ryan. But before we do, before I do pass it over to Gene, for his intro, um, I do want to thank Mason Hub, for being a premier partner of Third Person, and accordingly for being a sponsor of this month's Matt's Chats. I've had the pleasure of working with Mason Hub and getting to know the team over the last couple of years. I think Gene and I have known each other for probably that entire time, at least a year or so. And they've been a really great partner for many brands that we've supported back in my consulting days and now here at Third Person. So really excited that we're continuing to advance our partnership and really excited for Gene to be here to share a little bit more about what Mason Hub does and share different perspectives on how their clients are dealing with a lot of the tumult out there. So Gene, would love for you to maybe get things started. Share your role at Mason Hub, what Mason Hub does, and maybe a couple sentences on how tariffs and trade policies are affecting at least some of the customers that you serve today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt, for having me and hosting Match Chats this month with us. I appreciate being on. As you mentioned, I'm Gene Francois, head of partnerships at Mason Hub. Mason Hub is a high touch, or rather, I should say, is a 3PL that focuses on high touch fulfillment for operationally complex brands, especially in beauty, wellness, and fashion. Um, I've been in the industry for about 15 years ish. And obviously, like all of us here, there's been a lot of macroeconomic changes lately, even microeconomic pressures that have, caused brands to shift their strategy. And I think at Mason Hub, when we think of those three categories of brands, beauty, wellness, and fashion, they're all interestingly affected in different ways, right? I mean, at a high level, we see our fashion brands having to deal with some of the tariff situation that affects finished goods coming in from China, for example. But then there's obviously a different impact to beauty brands where there are federal regulations around reformulation, for example, or um, you can't just easily switch providers or source product from different countries without going through layers of compliance. So they're not as able to move as quickly as, let's say, a fashion brand. And then on the wellness side, you see impact in a different way, right? Like some brands may source certain ingredients from overseas, but for the most part, we see wellness brands, at least in our portfolio, manufacturing in the U.S., sourcing packaging, for example, in the U.S. So different strokes for different types of brands. And at Mason Hub, our role, especially my role is to procure partnerships that help them navigate these challenges. So, for example, I manage our consultancy portfolio. This is essentially our consultants that help our brands navigate tariff challenges, help our brands with like things like outsourced CFOs, outsourced COO, fractional help. So our brands are better prepared than, say, a newer brands entering the space.
Thanks, Gene. Thomas.
Hi, Matt. Great to be on the program with you. Appreciate the invite. So I head up global trade at Passport. So that's all things compliance, customs, tax, and product compliance. Passport, we help brands expand globally. And that's everything from the upfront setup of understanding which products can ship to which markets to surfacing a total landed cost or integrating that into the product price, all the way through the returns to and duty and tax recovery and duty drawback that we'll be talking about today.
Excellent. And Ryan.
Yeah. Hi, Matt. Thanks for having me. Really pleased to be here. Will be good to spend time with Eugene and you, Thomas, as well. My name's Ryan Letson. I'm an executive operator, most recently the chief operating officer and chief financial officer with tomboyx, which is a D2C native apparel retailer. I'm excited about this topic. This is what I've been living for the last year, if not two. Um, uh, the tariffs, the trade policy changes. I mean, it's been a profound impact. I think across the board, costs are obviously rising. Been a big focus on yes, protecting margins, but also really thinking about gross profit as the volume metric there. Consumers are feeling this from all angles. So as a brand, a lot of the focus is how do I protect my share of consumers' wallets? The geopolitical side effects. So when we think about the tariffs, and there's been a lot of talk about China the last couple of years, had some foresight on that. I think some of the geopolitical side effects is where there was a lot of surprises. So surprises abroad relative to an international response to U.S. Trade policy and pressure. A lot of businesses have experienced significant disruptions across the supply chain from a go-to-market perspective, and those disruptions in sales impact inventory planning, impact available capital, and so it's become a big area of focus. Thinking folks are seeking resilience in supply chain. But what I think about is how do I lean on the relationships that I have, and lean on the partnerships that I've created with my business. And Yeah, I think it's April 8th. So we just eclipsed the 1 year anniversary of the massive Liberation Day announcements. I think for a lot of folks over the last year, it's been a little bit of wait and see, super volatile. And I think at this point, businesses are required to put a stake in the ground from a planning perspective. So yeah, thanks again. Excited to be here and dig in, chat more.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Ryan. Um, uh, One quick thing, if any of the attendees have a question, we do have just put it in the chat there at the bottom there. We used to have like a Q&A button, but I don't see it right now on my screen. Maybe it's hidden somewhere, but oh yeah, we do have it. For me, it's under that more. But you can just put it in the chat if you have a question, and we'll try to get to some of these questions on a rolling basis. Otherwise, we'll certainly have some time at the end to address any questions for the group or anyone in particular. Or also share information on each of the panelists if you do want to connect with them afterwards, or reach out to me and I'll share their info. Ryan, I do want to call on you here for kind of our first topic, which is really kind of establishing like a baseline, or the current state of what's happening out there. So as you mentioned, we're now in April of 26, about a year since the initial shenanigans, for lack of better words, started. Uh, and it's been truly been a roller coaster, right? I think we all fear that every morning we're going to wake up and we're not sure what happened overnight, or what may have been said, or what didn't, what may not have been said overnight. So it's truly a roller coaster, and a lot of the brand operators, who are on this call can certainly empathize with that. So I'm curious. I mean, I know that you've recently left tomboyx, but recent enough for you to have a very good perspective on, and again, without oversharing or sharing to the extent that you're comfortable with them, I'm just curious, like what has been the actual impact on the business? Like how have tariffs over the last year impacted margins and pricing and just the fundamentals of the business?
Yeah, sure. Can chip in here, and I will speak from yes, my experience at tomboyx, but I can also speak to experience of brands across the industry that I've kept up with, as we collectively try to navigate and find our way through all this. I mean, the tariffs are massive, sweeping. I think a year ago or so, we were talking about, when we're thinking about China, the numbers get a little muddled in terms of like how all the different tariffs stack up, but there's numbers out there of like 145%, 165%. I mean, those types of tariff rates put your product completely underwater. So that takes you from a position of, hey, I have a viable business, to I actually can't even afford to sell this product because I lose money, even before I'm getting to the bottom line. So for a lot of brands, yeah, it's substantial, particularly for high growth brands. It can be the difference between being profitable and not. And when we're thinking about 165% tariff rate, I mean, that's the difference between having a viable business model and not. So the tariffs, the rates have subsided, as we all know, still super material. So if it's not a matter of having a viable business model or not, it is still a matter of, hey, how much am I actually able to invest in growth today versus ability to invest in growth a year ago or 2 years ago. So the stakes are huge. The stakes are huge. It's put more pressure on strategy. So if we're thinking about sourcing or manufacturing strategy, it's totally raised the stakes. So if you've had anything in motion from a diversification or negotiation perspective, I mean, all that stuff, it just has to happen faster. It just has to happen faster, and brands, the businesses depend on it. I mentioned a few moments ago leaning into relationships and partnerships in your business. I think this has been a big one in terms of, like, as a small business, like I don't have people on the Hill in DC keeping up with trade policy, but I've been fortunate enough to work with people who do, and those relationships have afforded some level of foresight for certain things happening. China's been on the chat for a number of years now, and so ability to garner info from partners is useful in terms of one's ability to actually be proactive. So when we're thinking about, like, well, what do I do about these tariff rates, or if I'm expecting cost to increase, a lot of brands have taken price up, negotiating costs. And so your ability, like a lot of this stuff, it's the long game. So your ability to start early on that will portend well in terms of seeing some of those results relative to the timing of these impacts. When I think about, like, what's one of the most challenging aspects of all of this, I think of the magnitude, the volatility, and then the manner of these policy changes. So the magnitude, the direct impact of the tariffs, it's huge. if we're talking 20% to 80% to over 100% tariff rate, that's obviously huge. The indirect impact from a geopolitical perspective has been profound. I know there's brands out there who have had massive disruptions at the border to the tune of not being able to import product for a number of weeks, if not months. Um, and then and then when we think about this in terms of a rodeo, just the lack of clarity of how things will be administered. So there will be an announcement or a tweet made. There's information out there. One needs to read, react, and respond. There's really no sense of, well, how's this actually even going to work? Is the government even prepared and capable to administer these things? So yeah, that for me is the one of the most challenging aspects is what do I do about this?
Yeah. Gene, I'm curious, like from the 3PL or fulfillment side of the house, I'm curious what you're seeing, across your client base. Like, is this impacting all your customers, many of your customers, some of your customers? Are they all kind of like tomboyx, where they're, have that similar perspective as Ryan just shared? And then I'm curious, maybe part B of that question. Um, like in your opinion, where are these brands who are impacted by tariffs, like where are they missing opportunities or making mistakes, and the ones who are navigating this better than others, like what are some of the strategies that they're deploying to sort of circumvent and offset some of the challenges in this environment?
That's a great question, Matt. Thank you for it. I think there's two types of brands, and I'll speak to MasonHub's brands, and then I'll speak broader about the category of brands. But I think over the last 18 months, especially, you've had brands that are proactive, as Ryan mentioned, and brands that are very reactive. And the example I'll give, just high level, is initially when we think of Liberation Day, it wasn't just an announcement of tariffs, but also, uh, a walking back of some of those tariffs, and then a switching, and there's a lot of back and forth over a couple of months. And I think what that did to operators was set an expectation that there might be swings in policy. So I think a lot of brands decided to take a wait and see approach, and I don't know, depending on the size of the brand, depending on the inventory buildup, that kind of thing, I think that might have been, the wrong approach for certain types of brands. Maybe for a smaller brand, that was the right approach. I think proactive brands were fundamentally looking at things like duty drawback, and looking at specific staging and buildup of safety stock in different regions. And then others were, let's leave things as is. Let's wait and see. This stuff might reverse eventually. And I think what brands that, especially on the high velocity D2C side, or even on the retail side, what brands that waited and saw ended up doing was getting caught flat-footed, right? When either the policy reversed, but then reversed again just a few weeks later. So I think proactively, when we're thinking about, hard to use this term in a shifting environment, but when we think about best practices, brands that are thinking long term are not looking at these things as reactive things to react to, but structuring their business differently. And for Mason Hub specifically, as I mentioned earlier, we do have like multiple categories of brands, and to a certain extent, they're all impacted, but they're all impacted in a different way. And beauty brands, for example, have a lot bigger challenges, right, when it comes to being agile. For example, on the sourcing side, they have regulation hoops to jump through. They also have things like proprietary ingredients from certain manufacturers that they may not necessarily be able to get from other manufacturers. So there are different strategies that a fashion brand might explore, for example, nearshoring or holding safety stock in the US, like doubling up on inventory before policy changes hit, that a beauty brand just might not be able to execute on as cleanly. Um, but I think each of them, the brands that are really executing this well have a strategy around pricing, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're going to survive, Ryan mentioned, a 165, 125% increase is going to put you underwater. I think on the beauty side, we saw about 25 to 35 to 50% increase in COGS. And that puts brands, if you're selling, a $20 product, you're adding $2 to $3 to that cost of goods. So what brands in our, portfolio are doing, because we have a lot of retail heavy brands, right? They're shipping for Sephora, they're shipping for Target, etc. I think you have a lot less pricing power on retail. So it's about moving a lot of velocity and demand to that, basically the channels where you have pricing power, which is usually going to be D2C. Um, and I think that that's the biggest, easiest, I should say, lever to pull. And then you have other strategies like duty drawback, depending on what kind of goods you sell, and auditing your HTS codes to make sure the classifications are correct. I mean, Thomas could speak to that better than I can. Um, but we see across the gambit different strategies that different brands are taking, and I think the highest leverage one is seeing what they can do on the D2C side to offset some of the pricing pressure.
Yeah, it's great. And Thomas, kind of similar question from your perspective. I'm curious, like how have tariffs changed cross-border operations, right? I think Ryan and Gene to an extent sort of talked about, all right, goods are here in the US, now what, right? Like how does a CFO think about this, or how do leaders at brands think about pricing in the new reality of this kind of inflationary environment, inflation as a function of tariffs. But I'm curious, given Passport's global perspective or global exposure, how have tariffs changed like cross-border operations? And I'm particularly interested in kind of U.S. brands. How are they thinking
Mm.
about cross-border and just things like are they pulling back from international business? Are they doubling down? Are they doing things differently? Yeah, just kind of curious on your take there.
Yeah, it's been interesting, and Ryan and John had some really good comments there, and definitely pressed down on a few of those. Another big shift here, aside from tariffs, is the end of de minimis, because that took away the entire 321 fulfillment program. You had many brands that were importing goods into Mexico and Canada and holding them there, and then fulfilling into the U.S. after the goods have been ordered. That's all gone. So you have an entire fulfillment model that went away with the end of de minimis. And it was very disruptive, and we saw many brands move inventory into the US as the alternative. And we've also seen brands consolidate some of their overseas fulfillment locations and move to a more of a centralized distribution model. But conversely, because of the US tariffs, we've also seen brands explore local fulfillment in key markets, whether that's Canada, UK, the EU, Australia. Your top 80% of the volume is likely going to those markets. And does it make sense for you to move inventory locally so that you can have it in country and you have a very clear understanding what the landed costs are, and you're avoiding importing into the US just to re-export? So that's another big valuation. Ryan, I think you had mentioned this, that some brands took a wait and see approach. That was definitely true. But I think now we know that the uncertainty is not going away. So it's definitely time to act and to evaluate everything from the top down. As you're exactly right about the data quality, and even looking at HS. Not only are they accurate, but are they the most optimal? If there are several codes that can fit your product, and one has a more favorable duty rate, and it's within the law to claim that HS code, then absolutely, you should be reviewing these things and relying on how you might have gotten these codes 10, 15 years ago. It goes all the way back to that. Let's look at the entire data set because it's driving everything. It is driving as COGS increase than what the final margin is. That those are two big shifts. I think the fulfillment itself, looking at where they can optimize distribution, and of course a lot of interest in drawback. It was a very niche offering for many years, but it is at the forefront now because it makes a lot of sense. And why not recover 99% of these duties and fees that you paid on goods that were imported and then re-exported or even destroyed? It's just money there that's on the table to be reclaimed. It's a process, and I think every merchant should go through the process of uh, back privileges because even if you don't need them immediately or you feel like the opportunity is not worth it, these tariffs are not going away. We now have Section 122 tariffs, and they are eligible for drawback. So absolutely, it's a very valuable, powerful program that merchants should be exploring. But yeah, those are the main things. I think it's everyone's unique depending on how many SKUs you have and how quick your turns are and where you're sourced from. It's definitely time to act. The wait and see is already in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, I was reading something I think over the weekend or the last couple days. I don't know if you saw it too, Thomas, but or if others saw it, but I'm going to butcher the exact numbers, but it may have been in the Wall Street Journal or some trade press that said that Chinese exports to the US were, maybe it was measuring over the last year. And again, don't quote me on the numbers, but it was, to the magnitude of like $100 billion in Chinese exports to the US. But then US customs registered something like $50 billion of imports from China. And again, like the numbers don't really matter other than there
Yeah,
was like a massive spread for like the
Right.
same darn thing, right? Like Chinese exports called this iPhone $100 and US
Yeah.
imports called this 50 cents, right? So there was and yeah, Thomas, you're nodding your head. I think you are familiar with what I'm sort of citing here, but yeah, I mean, is that like I mean, obviously it's happening, right? Because, I mean,
Yeah.
if you believe the data on both, I mean, either someone's lying or someone is overstating and someone's understating. So like I'm curious,
Yeah.
are you kind of seeing that and then maybe quickly after, I'm curious from Ryan's perspective, from like the brand's perspective, how are you is there kind of a game being played to sort of gamify the tariff codes and I hate to say the word
yeah,
cheat,
definitely.
but yeah, Thomas, yeah, maybe,
Yeah.
yeah, curious what you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's looking for a workaround, and that is one that you described right there. Customs did see that the value being declared for goods imported from China instantly decreased by 40% once these tariffs went into effect. It's the same product. It had been imported for years at one price, and now it's just 40% cheaper. Uh, because obviously the value that you're declaring for customs is directly impacting the duties and fees that you're paying. So undervaluing goods is definitely something that we're seeing as an approach. The other is the manufacturer or the supplier overseas saying, "I'll be the importer. I'll ship on DDP terms. Don't worry about it. I've got it. I'll declare it, and then you don't have to worry about it." Not really true. The brand is still can still be held responsible. We're seeing Department of Justice has its own task force set up for this. Customs is certainly paying attention to this, and they can still hold the brand responsible in this scenario. So I think that the DDP method, as well as another workaround we're seeing that I think is risky for brands. The other thing is it puts you in a real bad situation when tariffs are overturned or declared illegal because you no longer have a right to reclaim that money. Your supplier does because they paid it. And Section 122 tariffs that just replaced the IEEPA tariffs, they're under challenge. And the same attorneys who successfully argued the IEEPA tariff cases are now arguing the 122 tariffs are illegal. So where does that put us in a year? Are we back in the same position? Are you better off paying the tariffs and having a way to reclaim them as the importer? Yeah, definitely some big workarounds that we're seeing. Another is just and this is getting a lot more attention, but just trying to set up a shell company as the importer and then mitigate your liability that way. But the things that do sound too good to be true, they definitely are. I think there are compliant ways to approach tariff mitigation and even tariff engineering. But you definitely want to rely on some guidance from your customs broker or a trade consultant or a trade attorney to make sure that you're not exposing yourself even if you're not considered the importer, or do you still have some liability there? And can CBP and DOJ still go after you?
Awesome. Yeah, and then quickly, Ryan, yeah, I would love your perspective on kind of what, maybe not pointing fingers at you and tomboyx, but what are you hearing brands do to sort of validate this discrepancy?
Totally. So I had not heard those specific numbers, um, Matt, on that spread. But when I hear that terrifies me, and I would echo a lot of Thomas's remarks. I just hear risk, and I can't imagine taking that big of a risk in declaring goods for import and undervaluing them, because the stakes are just way too high. I mean, making an erroneous move like that can end up burying your brand. So that one, yeah, that one terrifies me. The I think there's, yeah, maybe two sides of the coin on this one too. Is I have seen some brands win and mitigate cost increases relative to trade terms and specifically DDP. Um, there are right ways of doing that, and brands can do that and do that successfully. I think um, one of the sort of side effects on this is like the admin and CBP climate, and and um, the status quo is just simply gone. So the way things have been done relative to prior administrations from an importation and customs and border patrol perspective, things are just very different. I think brands have seen this play out in customs audits getting pulled and seeing those processes play out. And I think there's brands out there who have experienced that and seen the facts just simply get ignored. So all that said, I think there's a right way and a legal way of addressing trade terms and DDP. I think there's still an element of risk and complexity as the admin wants to protect its ability to make such big splashy moves with tariffs. That would
Yeah.
be my, yeah.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Thomas, I do want to go back to you quickly. Jennifer, who had to run, had a question, but I'll follow up with her as well. But she asks, in light of the refunds we are all
Yeah.
anticipating via CAPE, if you utilize drawback, what complexity does that add to the refund process?
Yeah, it's a great question because most of the IEPA tariffs are eligible for duty drawback. But now that they have been overturned, it's makes more sense to go through your customs broker and try to reclaim the IEPA tariffs through this process and CAPE as they're describing. It's going to be phased. So we'll know more here on around April 20th when the thing is supposed to officially launch. But that's going to be the easiest path to reclaim the IEPA tariffs is going through that refund process. One thing to keep in mind is that you do need to have an ACE account set up with BP. If you don't, definitely get that in place. And you also need to have your bank details in that ACE account. That's the only way to get refunded, is they're no longer sending out paper checks. They're only doing ACH to your bank account. And if you don't have that set up in process, then the refund's not going to go anywhere. So definitely make sure you're working with your broker to get set up with an ACE account and to make sure you're eligible for refunds. But back to the drawback question, it is, because you can't double, you cannot reclaim the same tariffs as duty drawback, and also get refunded for them via this CAPE process. So record keeping is very important. You want to make sure that if your drawback provider is different from your customs broker, that they're in touch and communicating on this. If you have pending drawback claims that have IEPA tariff, aware of that so that you remove the liquidation process and what you're going to be claiming back through CAPE. But that's really it. Just make sure that you're not double dipping and double claiming, because that's going to throw both of the refunds into jeopardy, both the duty drawback and the CAPE refunds of IEPA.
Great. And then Casey just asked a question on a similar note. He asks, beyond establishing an ACE account with CBP, our ocean freight forwarder has advised that we are now in a wait and see period as various lawsuits work through the courts.
Hmm.
Any thoughts there?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Some attorneys are saying definitely file, protect your rights. Others are saying there's no need to file. So it comes down to a personal decision, I think, whether to file or not to file. I'd like to think that we can trust the process, but if you have the resources to file and to get in line and make sure you're protected, then beyond just establishing the ACE account, it is going to be a wait and see process to some extent. But the Court of International Trade is very much holding CBP accountable, and they're demanding weekly updates on the CAPE process and where it stands. The court is going to hold them responsible for refunding the tariffs. The mechanisms, I think, are what is really the question. There's a spreadsheet that the brokers will fill out and importers will fill out to reclaim the IEPA tariffs through CAPE, but the fine details there have not been revealed. You don't quite have a template yet. So there is a lot of wait and see, but I think it has less to do with the lawsuits going through the courts right now and more about just the refund process and how it's going to be phased in. I the court, though, to hold CBP accountable here and to make sure that the refunds actually do happen.
Yeah, interestingly, I'm going to put something here in the chat because I'm a bit of a degenerate. I like looking at the betting markets to see what they
Yeah.
say. And Polymarket, their bet on will the court force Trump to refund tariffs is literally at, 51%, up from about 23% a few weeks ago, I guess, after the Supreme Court decision. So, it's interesting to kind of hear, Thomas, if I can, it sounds like you're fairly definitive or confident that um, that the court will force, I guess, Trump or the government to refund the tariffs, but the betting markets are not as confident. So there's money to be made, I suppose.
Yeah, I'll have to read the fine lines it means, and might have to get on that, because that is an
Yeah, right.
interesting one. I think the timing is the question, because CBP can always say, well, we're going to look at this import a little bit more closely. So they always have the right to push that back. So even if you think something is going to automatically liquidate, and then you're going to get refunded for these IEPA tariffs that you paid, and now that you're getting them plus interest, which is nice at 6%. There always is the risk that CBP can take a closer look at that entry and delay the process of the refund. But I don't. Even the administration has said, if it's ruled, if this rules that the IEPA tariffs are illegal, we're not going to challenge that process of refunding it. But then again, it is $166 billion plus interest, so it's a lot of money at stake. I just don't see a way around it that they can decide they're not going to refund. It's really just time, I think.
Yeah, we'll appreciate that. We have just a few minutes left, so I do want to move on. I know we can talk about this for much longer, and of course, anyone could connect with any of the any of the panelists after this call. I know everyone will be happy to chat. But I do want to kind of look ahead. So, we've kind of acknowledged the problem. We've talked about the problem and the uncertainty. But I'm curious, just kind of looking forward, which I realize is really difficult right now when no one is really sure whether tariff policy is going to stabilize, whether it'll get more complex, whether maybe it'll get a little easier. Depending on what might happen in the midterms, which are not too far away, things could change quite significantly, right? But maybe going with Gene on this one, to start. I'm curious, what are some smart or shrewd decisions that or supply chain initiatives that brands in your portfolio, your clients are thinking about, or maybe just things that you would recommend brands to think about as they continue on in 2026?
Great question. I think auditing demand and understanding how to mirror that with an inventory strategy. When you think of international trade, brands now are looking more and more to sell in the EU, in the UK, in Australia. And for the right, for all brands, I think they should be taking a look at their ad spend, what they're doing to personalize and localize, and understanding at what point they should start staging inventory locally and domiciling that inventory, for example, in the UK or in Australia or in the EU, because we're not the only ones with tariffs, right? International countries are implementing their own sets of, kind of the elimination of 321 on our side, their version of that in the UK and in the EU coming in 2027, for example. So all that to say is, you're experiencing pricing pressure in the U.S. You might want to diversify your demand channels in general, but in doing so, might want to also stage inventory internationally. Another strategy that brands are using is not just looking at duty drawback in the U.S., but looking at Canada's duty drawback. I think it's called the Canadian Relief uh, Drawback or
Yeah,
something.
casual refund program. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, for a lot of brands, it does actually make sense to fulfill into the US from Canada, right? When you're talking about, putting inventory into Vancouver, fulfilling the West Coast, et cetera, getting that refund or rebate on that duties paid into Canada. Now, it doesn't make sense for everybody, right? Because you sometimes have a double tax situation if you're importing to the US and Canada, et cetera. But I think that actively evaluating where it makes sense to place inventory to optimize your credits back. And another point to make on that particular program is there's flexibility on, I don't want to say flexibility on documentation, but flexibility on classification when you think about which SKUs are eligible for drawback versus the documentation needed. So I think leveraging drawback both in the US and abroad, staging inventory, and honestly, and this is like I go back to my initial strategy, looking at D2C the same way brands used to look at D2C back in the 2014s, right? Pricing pressure is definitely something that brands are facing, but they're also facing customer acquisition cost pressure. So D2C is not, it's not the Wild West it used to be back in the Facebook ad days. However, I do think you have a strategic lever on that channel to be able to pass on, you know, different types of tariff, 301, uh, reciprocal tariffs. These things are tacked on to each other. So, you might want to think about repricing in the D2C channel to offset some of the losses elsewhere. And then the last strategy I would say is simply, on the sourcing side, although brands may not be able to be as agile, they might not have enough liquidity to have multiple providers, that kind of thing. I think negotiating with the provider, if you have enough leverage to share some of the burden, is definitely a strategy that some brands are looking at.
I appreciate that, Gene. Ryan, um, I'm curious from your sort of operating exec purview, um, what are some investments that you would be making or that you're advising brands and that you're aware of brands making to become more resilient in light of the sort of macro pressures that we've been talking about?
Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Great question, and I agree with the momentum that Gene just created there. I think key word for me on this is resilience. So I got to protect margins, but I need to protect when it all boils down to it. Yes, the margin, but I need to feel comfortable with my gross profit and my volume metric relative to the size and scale of my business. So I think about that, and I think about that balanced against the working capital constraints that I may have. So the when I think about investments, it's an investment in um, deepening my understanding of my business and the levers I have available to influence. So if I'm thinking about resilience of getting product to market, I'm examining my inbound lead times. I want to ensure that I'm protected from unforeseen delays at customs. Do I have room for this built in to my lead times? Um, uh, that's gonna put some pressure on working capital. So are there things that I can do to offset that? I think thinking about bonded warehouses or free trade zone warehouses as a staging ground of, can I have control of my product very near to my distribution center, if not the same place, and can I park and can I delay that tariff impact to protect the working capital side. Um, and then I think something that we've talked a bit about brands having to increase price, brands having to go back to the negotiating table um, with their suppliers and all elements of the supply chain there. I think another area that I would encourage all brands to do is sort of the acknowledgement of what the broader consumer is faced with right now. So they're getting pressure from every angle, almost every purchasing decision. Um, and your customers need to be compelled to preserve your wallet share in the face of rising prices and economic pressure. So what does that mean for brands? It means you need to sharpen your value prop, communicate the reasons to believe, and you're likely charging more for your product today than you were a year ago or 2 years ago. And I would be asking myself, do my customers understand why I'm worth it? Do they understand? Is my product worth the price that I'm charging? And what work do I need to do in there to make sure that I'm bridging that gap?
Yeah, appreciate that, Ryan. Um, One last question for Thomas, and then we'll wrap up here. But yeah, Thomas, I guess in a similar vein, um, uh, what are well, I'm thinking, do I end on a more positive note or on a less positive note? But maybe I'll throw two questions at you, and you can choose which one or both to answer. But
Sure.
I'm curious, like when you're talking to brands on international strategy, maybe what are kind of one or two key elements that are sort of non-negotiables that every brand should be thinking about. And I guess maybe the flip side of that question, the slightly more pessimistic approach is like, what's the biggest strategic mistake that you're seeing brands make? Something that they should absolutely avoid, but looks like feels like most are pursuing that.
Yeah, I think on the latter one, the biggest mistake is pursuing some of these workarounds that are just not going to work, and they're going to put you in a really bad spot from a liability standpoint. But on the other side, what you've never had more access to information than you do now with AI, and you can move so much faster. There's some really good points there from Ryan and John about being able to test the marketing material and the pricing in different markets. And I think that's a really smart way to approach it. We do have some major changes coming, and July 1st in the EU, de minimis goes away. And now you've got a flat €3 fee coming. And then in November, it's going to be another €2 handling fee on top of it. So another €5 essentially per product that you're going to be importing into the European Union. So does it make sense to look at forward stocking inventory to get it out of that low value stream and import on more of a cost of goods basis, store inventory in the EU and fulfill from there? Is that an approach that makes sense for your brand? The other thing John, going back to what you're talking about, the beauty brands and the nutritional supplements brands, great markets for international. The one thing I think I would be considering is if you are looking to sell into a Sephora or some sort of a reseller or wholesaler, then you want to make sure that you're starting on the product compliance path now, because it can take a while. That's probably the other biggest mistake we see, is that brands expect this to go immediately. And even for, we're going to move inventory to the UK, find out, well, it's going to be 6, 8, 12 weeks till I get my tax ID so I can even import into the UK. Everything takes time, and you really need to start planning now and working toward it from a product compliance standpoint. Definitely, if you can get your products compliant in more locations with a single SKU, then that's the ideal. Then one package that you can sell in multiple markets and be prepared to fulfill locally and more spots. I think it does go to the.
Nope. I think we may have lost you at the end there, Thomas, but I think we caught most of that. Well, with that said, we are out of time. So maybe we'll wrap it up here, but really appreciate Ryan and Gene and Thomas for being here. Gene, thanks again. Really appreciate MasonHub sponsoring this webinar, and being a really great premier partner of Third Person. Oh, I think you're back, Thomas. Yeah, we lost, I think, probably the last 5 seconds. So, we caught most of it. I did put in the chat each of the panelists' LinkedIn profiles, as well as their emails, are at the bottom. If you do miss that, feel free to reach out to me. We'll also be circulating this probably in the next 24 hours over email. So you'll be able to, replay it. We'll have it on YouTube and, different socials. So thanks everyone for joining today. Thank you to the panelists for being here. And I hope everyone has a great afternoon. Thank
Thanks,
you
man.
all.
Appreciate it.